Heart disease is a silent killer because many people with it simply don't know. The routine lipid panel assays give an indication of risk, but they don't nail it down. If someone has atherosclerosis, for instance, clogging of the arteries, then it doesn't definitively tell that patient. Other screens are more expensive, not accessible to everybody, and have certain consequences. So they are not done generally for the whole population. Recently, I found I have atherosclerosis. My parents both died of heart failure, but they were significantly older than me. I don't think I'm that overweight. I do have stress, but is that the only reason for my condition, or is there totally a different reason? As a research biomedicinal chemist, I became very, very interested in atherosclerosis, clogging of the artery. I made a few videos on lipids, primarily for my undergraduate organic chemistry class. They are. And you can find them in my channel. Here, I'd like to take the emphasis off of chemistry a little bit and come to a conclusion about how I think atherosclerosis begins. I'm not saying this is how it begins, always. I'm not saying even that it really began that way for me. But from what I'm reading, this seems to me the most plausible explanation. To understand heart disease, you really have to understand a little bit about lipids. There's four main classes, and there are two that are primarily important for heart disease. And the first one is triglycerides. Triglycerides have a core fragment and long chains. The core fragment is glycerol, and the long chains are fatty acids, which condense with the glycerol to form esters. And those are called triglycerides. Many patients will have had in a lipid panel a measurement of their triglyceride. In general, the tendency is, at least in the Western population, to have higher triglycerides than is advisable. The three fatty acids that constitute triglycerides can be all the same, they can be different. If those three fatty acids do not contain carbon-carbon double bonds, then those fatty acids are saturated. And in a triglyceride, this gives you a saturated fat. You see, in this chemical structure here, there are no CC double bonds, no alkenes, saturated fat. An example of a saturated fat is one of my favorites, coconut oil. Coconut oil has a very high proportion of saturated fats. A characteristic of saturated fats is they tend to be solids at room temperature, and that's desirable for some types of foods. Other triglycerides contain unsaturated fats, chains with a C double bond C. They can contain only one double bond, and then it's a monounsaturated fat, or they can contain two or more, and then it's a polyunsaturated fat. Most natural unsaturated fats contain cis alkenes. That means that the two bonds to the alkene are on the same side. They're liquids at room temperature, like olive oil. Olive oil is predominantly monounsaturated fats. One drawback of unsaturated fats is they have a poor shelf life. In fact, if you're buying olive oil, it's very good to know the harvest date of the olives. The freshest olive oil gives you the most benefit. In some parts of Europe, this is always included in the bottle. In many of the bottles I've looked at in the United States, I don't find it. Olive oil on the shelf will eventually go rancid. It won't taste as good, and there won't be as many nutrients in it. So manufacturers selling oils that contain polyunsaturated fats particularly, or monounsaturated fats somewhat, don't particularly like that poor shelf life because they can't manufacture on scale, store, and ship on demand. The isomer of cis double bonds is trans double bond. If a triglyceride contains trans double bonds in the chains, then it's called a trans fat, and they are bad for you. They're tolerable in small amounts. Butter, for instance, has some trans fats, but In excess, they are definitely bad for you. And that excess can be far lower than you might be accustomed to in your diet. Trans fats have been unambiguously proven to be associated with atherosclerosis, heart disease. Manufacturers may take unsaturated fatty acids, which are cis, relatively harmless, and hydrogenate them with a catalyst. The problem with that is if the hydrogenation is not complete. Partially hydrogenated oils, for instance, which are now being phased out, contain trans fats. Examples of substances that contain trans fats are margarine and many ultra-processed foods. Some of these manufactured substances are not really foods at all, so I hesitate to say that. But many things you will find in the supermarket are ultra-processed. So if trans fats are being phased out, what do manufacturers do to oils to extend their shelf life? Well, they take non-hydrogenated oils containing double bonds, cis double bonds, and hydrogenated oil, totally saturated by a hydrogenation process, hypothetically, but they may still contain traces of trans fats, which are dangerous. They blend these together to give a manufactured oil with a longer shelf life. I mentioned that oils containing particularly polyunsaturated fats and even monounsaturated fats tend to oxidize. Now, I promise I wouldn't give you a chemistry lesson, and I've already given it in another video. There's chemistry that will convert a cis-alkene with a CH next to the alkene, that's an allylic CH, into a radical, which isomerizes the double bond. So cis may go to trans, and then the radical that's formed might react with oxygen to give substances called hydroperoxides, allylic hydroperoxides. The major components of seed oils like saffron, sunflower, corn oil are polyunsaturated fats. And the major polyunsaturated fats is linoleic acid. It's an omega-6 fatty acid incorporated, remember, into a triglyceride to give you the fat. Linoleic acid has two hydrogens between two double bonds, not just one. It's more vulnerable to that oxidation process, allylic oxidation, which, recall, takes a cis double bond to a trans double bond. That's not good. And even worse, gives radicals which can react with oxygen to give hydroperoxides. I would not want to eat trans fats anymore. I would not want to eat anything with an allylic hydroperoxide in it. Given the choice between eating a trans fat and something with an allylic hydroperoxide in, I would choose the trans fat, even though trans fats are unambiguously associated with atherosclerosis. Why is that? Well, because peroxides in general are extremely bad for biological systems. They tend to generate free radicals. Oxidation of linoleic acid doesn't just give one allylic hydroperoxide, it can give three. And those can go on and form other things, secondary metabolites. So collectively, these are known as oxidized polyunsaturated fatty acids, and they are bad for you. The secondary metabolites are bad for you as well. So oxidized PUFAs can have many structures, and none of them are nutritious. Let me tell you one route by which atherosclerosis can be initiated. I've already explained. When you eat food, you form fatty globules in the blood. And these are quite large at first. As they distribute in the bloodstream, dropping off nutrients like lipids, including triglycerides and cholesterol, to cells which need triglycerides and cholesterol, those globules become smaller. And eventually they get small enough to be called LDL, low density lipoproteins. These low density lipoproteins circulate in the bloodstream. And if they get very small, they become more dangerous. And if they're oxidized LDLs, and they can definitely cause inflammation. This diagram shows how an LDL particle, a small one, can be oxidized and insert between the cells of the lining of the arteries, the epithelial cells, and that causes inflammation. Inflammation attracts cells in the blood called macrophages. It's the job of a macrophage to identify foreign materials and absorb them. When they absorb them, they form foam cells, lipid-laden, bloated macrophages. And you can see them on the diagram here. Those foam cells can die around the site of inflammation and generate spots, pimples, if you like. Those pimples are composed of various things, including dead foam cells, a little bit of calcium, and fibrous material, which will eventually form from the dead foam cells. This can be seen in histology, where you see contraction of the artery and that fibrous material around it. The fibrous material, including the foam cells, are the major component of atherosclerotic plaques, of blockage of the artery. Therefore, plaques are not cholesterol. Plaques do contain some cholesterol, but the major component of those plaques is fibrous material and dead foam cells, formed as a consequence of oxidized LDL penetrating between the epithelial cells. There's a YouTuber called Nick. Nick makes wonderful videos about heart disease. One of his videos featured this paper. In the patients with a CAC score of 0, CAC, coronary artery calcium, CAC, and it shows buildup of calcium in the artery and around the artery together, but it's a very good indicator of prospects for heart disease. High LDL levels didn't correlate, but the patients with a CAC score of greater than 0 already had evidence of plaque. Then LDL was a predictor. LDL scores can be a predictor if there's plaque there already, but if there's no plaque there, high LDL is tolerable. Now, as a scientist, rather than a clinician, we always try to rationalize the data. What's the best possible explanation for this? I think at this stage, the best possible explanation is if LDL is circulating in the blood, but is not being oxidized to a significant extent, then there's not much oxidized LDL to start an inflammatory event in the artery blood vessel. So high LDL is not a good correlator for heart disease in that particular case. But once LDL becomes significantly oxidized to an extent which is more than the body can deal with, because the body has natural defenses, then that oxidized LDL will start atherosclerotic plaques. Once it does, the chance of a heart attack or a stroke goes up. And if a patient has high LDL thereafter, they're circulating a lot of LDL particles, which presumably get oxidized by the same events and start more plaque, start more inflammation. An inference of that is perhaps a patient with very high LDL, but no signs of atherosclerosis in terms of CAC score, well, maybe they don't need to go on statins so badly, even though the LDL is very high. But a patient who's developed atherosclerosis should go on statins. They need to bring their LDL levels down because that presumably will bring the level of oxidized LDL down as well and slow the propagation of atherosclerosis. Okay, how do LDL particles oxidize? Well, they could oxidize on cholesterol, but it's far more likely they're going to oxidize on polyunsaturated fatty acids. So you see, a high concentration of polyunsaturated fatty acids in the diet combined with oxidation somewhere to give oxidized PUFAs is very undesirable with respect to heart disease. So beginning with a polyunsaturated fatty acid, a potential food source, where can it oxidize? At which stage in the process that leads to putting it in our mouths and digesting it and beyond, can that material oxidize? On the shelf, as I've already said. If you take polyunsaturated fatty acids and simply put them on the shelf, eventually they will go rancid, they will oxidize, and you will get oxidized PUFAs. But even before they hit the shelves, they may oxidize in the manufacturing process. In a previous video, I outlined that manufacturing process in a bit more detail. It's brutal. It's complicated. We really don't know all the steps that the manufacturers use, and it involves some steps that are highly likely to give oxidation. One is heating the oil to very high temperatures, perhaps to distill off hexanes, perhaps for other reasons. Another one is to bleach the oil to get rid of colors and bad smells. In both these processes, oxidation can result. It's hard to find rules and regulations about the acceptable level of oxidized PUFAs in processed seed oils. I simply do not know how processed vegetable oils are regulated and if there's any good controls about how much peroxide is acceptable. So my conclusion is the processing can definitely generate peroxides in oils, and whether they're there or not in foods that we consume is a little bit murky, a little bit opaque. It certainly relies on the manufacturers to regulate these substances. And I wonder if you trust them to do that. Industrially processed seed oils are everywhere in processed foods. They're not just in bottles of oil for cooking with, they're in many of those products which are packaged in the supermarket. You should carefully check the ingredients labels to see if they contain soy, canola, sunflower oil, for instance. Personally, I don't take any products these days that contain those oils, and I certainly don't use them for cooking. But cooking is another major way to introduce oxidation. This is you. Of course, you're an excellent first-rate chef. So let's fry up something, for instance, stir fry quickly. Nice high heat in the oxygen atmosphere. Oh, not enough salt, not enough ultra-processed soy sauce, not enough ultra-processed chili sauce, maybe a little bit more oil, so hot because it's cooked in flames. There's no way the processed seed oils containing linoleic acid will 100% survive that process. Some of them will be oxidized to allylic peroxides and other things. Deep fried food, extremely bad. Those oils are absorbed very nicely into the food. And even if at home you don't use the oil more than once, in restaurants they routinely do. So that oil is boiled and maintained boiling for a long time. In the air, it will oxidize and peroxides will be formed. Once food is consumed and you form these globules in the blood, those globules, very quickly becoming LDL, can be oxidized. And there's an enzyme that does this, myeloperoxidase, MPO. MPO is associated with white blood cells, and it's known to oxidize LDL, and high levels of myeloperoxidase are known to correlate with atherosclerosis. If a triglyceride enters a cell, then it may be oxidized by the mitochondria. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, and mitochondrial health is very important. Mitochondria are relied upon to take food inputs and process them into nutrients that the body needs. These mitochondria process foods into usable forms of energy like ATP by electrochemical processes, essentially. They generate a potential, and that potential is relatively high for a cell. It's just like the mitochondria initiate thunderstorm around the substances that enter them. And those thunderstorms can oxidize. In fact, those thunderstorms are sometimes designed to oxidize these food inputs. When they do, if there's too much of a substance coming through the chain, or if that substance is contaminated with things that disrupt the function of mitochondria, then that is bad. And eventually, mitochondria in the cell may die. And if too many mitochondria in the cell die, the whole cell will die. This is mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria, these poor little guys, they have to process any food that you give them. The food may be relatively healthy. The food may be ultra processed. And mitochondria, if they're yours, are only human. If you keep feeding them junk, they have to deal with all this junk. And that's not an easy life. One form of junk which can be generated in mitochondria is oxidized PUFAs. Oxidized PUFAs entering mitochondria can do them no good. Oxidized PUFAs then are at the heart of mitochondrial dysfunction. Mitochondrial dysfunction causes heart disease, cancer, neurological diseases, metabolic diseases, inflammatory diseases, even psychiatric disorders, and aging. My list may not be complete. Isn't it strange how sperm count for males has declined a lot in recent years? Sperm have very few mitochondria, and they use these mitochondria to fuel swimming to meet their date. If those mitochondria dysfunction, the sperm are less able to swim. Could that be the reason for declining sperm count in modern time? This is a present-day mystery. Another type of lipid is steroids. Steroids include sex hormones like estrogen, testosterone. They also include cholesterol. I have another video on cholesterol and the problem with associating cholesterol with heart disease. Cholesterol is an essential lipid. Cells need cholesterol. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.